I'm sure by now everyone's had enough of me, so thank you for tolerating. We're starting our third day. Again, as usual, the French say le quart d'heure académique. It's like the 15 minutes after which you start. So a lot of us who are trained in urban studies will say this to our French colleagues this morning, owe it very much to the French having established an urban observatory here in Beirut right after the Civil War. And that urban observatory mainstreamed a lot of practices and interest in the city and in research, but also le quart d'heure académique. You start 15 minutes late. So excuse us for that. It's their mistake. And welcome again. We're really happy this morning to welcome a panel addressing issues of housing. This is one of the panels that touches most closely the work of the Beirut Urban Lab and some of the research we've been doing. So we're super excited about it. It's also more generally a more hands-on day, more applied. So I think some of the students will encourage you to see the linkages between the more large picture questions we asked yesterday and their applied consequences. To moderate this panel, I cannot think of a better person than my friend, mentor, colleague, Jad Tabet. Jad is a practicing architect and urban designer, award-winning, many wonderful projects that I encourage you to look at. He's worked a lot on affordable housing here in Lebanon, but also and mostly in Paris, experimenting with architectural models. He also is one of the only success stories we have in political gains when we won the elections at the Order of Engineers and Architects in 2017 with Jad running. It's because Jad was president that we got the first data set that allowed us to have the Beirut Built Environment database. So it's not just a lot of hard work, it's also luck and some opportunity, and we recognize that. I won't say more. I'm sure he'll charm you. Jad, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. So today we are going to speak about the issue of housing and value capture. The issue of housing is a central issue today in Lebanon. The problem is that since the creation of Lebanon and the independence of Lebanon in the 1940s, there have been no housing policy at all. There have been different attempts creating Banque de l'Habitat, a Ministry of Housing. Now we have Établissement Public for Housing, but all the experiences that were done during all these periods were really limited and couldn't solve the problem that we have today, which is the problem of imbalance, the problem of difficult inaccessibility of young people and of poorest classes to houses, mainly in the cities. There is a special question that is always coming back, which is the issue of the renting. In 1948, there have been a law that was similar to the law that was done in France, which is to freeze the rents for a certain period. With every 10 years, some law that will raise a little bit the rent. What happened is that till the Civil War, the housing market was basically a market based on rents. Very few people owned houses or wanted to own houses. I speak basically in the city. People have their house in the villages, etc. But people in the city, mainly in Beirut, in Tripoli, in the big cities, didn't own houses. They rented houses. After the war, there have been a complete shift in the practice. And people started, I mean, first of all, there were no more rents on the market. Developers basically built houses to sell them. And this created a real problem because the capacity of poorest classes and young people to have access to housing and to buy housing is limited in the cities, I always insist. The other problem is that of the old rents that were freezed, and there have been a series of laws that opened the issue, that removed the freeze, and now we have also serious problems for people who used to live in rented houses with rents that were moderate. And now they are trying to find, I mean, there is a real problem that is happening and will happen in the next year, basically. You will have 10,000 of people that would be expelled from their houses, and there is a real problem. What would these people do, and how can we solve the situation? So the issue of value capture in housing is a central issue today in Lebanon. It's everywhere, but in Lebanon it's a very important question. And this is why the urban, I mean, it has become a central issue also in the Beirut Urban Lab concern. So please, now I will invite the three speakers. Our first speaker is Francisco Sabatini. Francisco is a sociologist from the Catholic University of Chile and PhD in urban planning from the University of California, Los Angeles. He's full professor at the Universidad del Bío-Bío in the city of Concepción, Chile, and at the Catholic University of Chile in the capital city of Santiago. His research and lecturing have covered residential segregation, gentrification, local environment conflicts, and urban lab markets and policy. He's part of the faculty of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and today a member of the Advisory Council of the National Housing Policy of Chile. Our second speaker is Mariona Segú. Mariona is an assistant professor at TIMA and Cergy Paris University since September 2021 and an IEB research affiliate. She obtained a PhD in economics from the University Paris-Saclay and RITM in 2020. Her main research fields are urban economics, housing economics, public policy, and environmental economics. Her recent research projects have addressed the tax on vacant apartments and the entry of Airbnb in the housing market. Her ongoing projects focus on the development of bike lanes networks, rent control regulation, and zero-interest green loans. Our third speaker, she will be with us by Zoom, is Şevkiye Şence Türk. She's a professor at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning in the Faculty of Architecture at the Istanbul Technical University. Her main interests are urban legal and administrative aspects in the development of the built environment, land development processes, the use of land readjustment in urban areas, value capture instruments and policies, serviced land supply for housing, and location theory. She has been involved in various national and international research projects related to issues of urban planning and land development, either as a coordinator or as a researcher. So I'm sure this session will be very interesting. Please, the speakers, please come and take your seats.
Hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. and happy to be in Beirut, my first time, and I'm surprised of the city, of so nice people, good food, good wine. So, and thanks especially to Mona, Enrique, and all the team, the students helping us in this event. Nice event. I apologize because of my English is kind of poor. Anyway, so I put that title to my presentation, The Global Housing Crisis Experienced from Chile. I have a lot of things in the PowerPoint. I will kind of be skipping in order to get in time with everything. I have kind of 5 sentences, like you say, main ideas. That's the very first one. The conversion of urban housing into the world's main financial asset is a major driver of the global housing crisis. Some citations of the Economist, the newspaper. Households around the world have far more of their wealth tied up in property than in shares. Yet more recently, home sales have crashed while one group of buyers, however, remain unfazed, Wall Street. And there you have the, pardon me. I didn't see that. I started before. That is a social housing compound in Concepcion, in a part of a renewal project, a big renewal project, and it's now like with the ghetto effect. And so those are the type of things we should research and understand why it did not success, because it's kind of inclusionary housing. So it's the size of the dwellings, is micro segregation in this area. What happened with that? And that was what I was reading, the yellow things. So you have the graph there with the a value of houses. So the price of housing has grown and reached severely unattainable levels, say both the World Bank on Latin American countries and the Chilean Chamber of Constructors for the case of Chile. They run an index that is an international one, well known. Yet the amount of housing offered may even be expanding, but housing prices continue to rise, as in Concepcion. That is a picture of Concepcion, the city I live in. So you have all these very disturbing towers growing constructed in these typical neighborhoods, like houses, and so there's a lot of discussion there about this, and this is a good the real estate people are making a lot of money with this, and so the markets are like crazy. You have these prices, and people from the real estate sector will speak about the state regulation is the cause of prices going up. That's the neoliberal explanation. There have some citations of Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize, and Professor Edward Glaser. Both wrote papers in 2005, years before the crisis, trying to explain why housing prices in the US were going up so rapidly. And Krugman said, American housing market is approaching the final feverish stage of a speculative bubble. And Glaser didn't mention anything like that. And he went on speaking about urban regulation that drive up the cost of land. There's a theoretical thing about this. Price of land is not a cost of construction, it's rent. And there's some sort of, I would say, like lack of clarity on the part of these economists. And Krugman says about this type of neoliberal explanations, someone will always come up with reasons why seemingly absurd asset prices make sense. This is a picture of the social outbreak uprising in October 2019. You had similar things here. And that was the largest and most socially extensive mobilization in the country's history, and had the housing crisis as one of its causal factors, also pensions, health, education. And here's the slogan in the streets: neoliberalism was born and will die in Chile. Second, the current real estate crisis has had a long start being a central factor, the breakdown of the pattern of segregation. I will go into spatial argument. We had a very successful housing policy, neoliberal, with vouchers, and so the housing deficit came down for many years until more or less 2006. It started growing again, and that's because of the type of housing that was offered by this program: segregated, small, and people will have the vouchers in their hand and they didn't use them because the alternative was just to keep where they were living, in shanty towns or with the parents or whatever. So you have shanty towns, we call them campamentos. That's a kind of a military word because they usually were organized seizures of land by political parties or connected to political parties from the center to the left. And the other photo is a housing compound of the ones produced by this demand-oriented housing policy. Those figures are from a book of Flavio Vilaça, Brazilian architect and urbanist, on the internal structure of Brazilian cities, Sao Paulo and Belo Horizonte. The black part is the rich people. So we speak in Latin America about the cone of segregation or concentration of the 10% more or less of the richest households. The rupture, how do you say that? Rupture of the pattern of segregation consisting of the dispersion of affluent households from the areas of concentrations, the high-income cones of Latin American cities, has meant the gentrification of parts of the segregated, homogeneous, low-income periphery and the rise of land prices there. In fact, land prices are rising faster in these low-income areas of the city, faster than in downtown or in the rich part of the cities. They are lower prices, but they are growing fast. So there's a lot of there's kind of huge, you can fabricate huge rent gaps being from the real estate sector. I would pretend that similar processes of mutation of the pattern of segregation have occurred in several parts. For instance, this is a book of this guy, The Great Inversion, that is the growing percentage of new houses being built in the city and not in the suburbs in very big American cities from the could be 70s. So this is mobile. So you don't have a fixed pattern of segregation. It's always moving, and that's part of the economy, the land markets economy. Gentrification in a broad sense is equivalent to urban development. At the individual land parcel level, current uses or occupants are displaced by users or occupants paying more for that land. In a very practical way, you can define urban development as that specific action or process. Land price growth is inherent to urban development. Land prices are not production costs, but rents, profits. These spatial ruptures have intensified since residential property became the main global asset. Here is a piece on an argument of David Harvey in this book. The creation of geographical differences is at the heart of capitalism. If geographical difference between territories and states did not exist, then they would be created by both differential investment strategies and the quest for spatial monopoly power given by uniqueness of location and of environmental and cultural qualities. The idea that capitalism promotes geographical homogeneity is totally wrong. It thrives on heterogeneity and difference. So gentrification is a way of creating a specific sort of geographical differences, the rent gap. But the transformation of the peripheries of Latin American cities aggravates the housing crisis. Gentrification does not include displacement of people, but furthers the exclusion of new social or economic housing due to the rise in land prices. Displacement does not take place in gentrifying low-income peripheries of Latin American cities because there's vacant land, it's the periphery. You have all industrial sites, for example. So you don't need to get land and to evict people that are living there. You have vacant land. The other thing is that residents are owners of their houses, not renters, or they are illegal occupiers of land. Then in practical terms, it's more or less the same to be an owner. The other reason is where in Latin America, the structure of inequalities. We have the Gini coefficient is very high in Latin America, but it has a structure, and the big social division or gap is in the upper part of the social structure. And so you have more smooth differences in the lower part. And that's very important, because you can build when people mix in that lower part of the scale, you can build more easily the sense of being part of the same community. And the other thing is mestizo culture. I put this in the vein of the urban culture of social mixing in which Beirut has past accomplishment. I understand that, as well as today in certain districts. So if one city had something that city lost, that city can recover that. And that's a big philosophical argument of Walter Benjamin. And that picture is Chicago, Cabrini Green, that ghetto. Yes, the buildings you see there, they were in that moment being demolished and replaced by these houses as part of a mixed income housing program that had a lot of problems. And one of the reasons, I believe, is this of the structure of inequality, because in the US, the great social divide is that between middle classes and minorities. And it has this racial dimension that is very difficult and hard. This is another picture. This is Mexico, Azcapotzalco. This is an old working class neighborhood. And in the back part of the picture, you have the new buildings, the gentrification project. There's a big hospital nearby, so there are many people like from that area, professionals that will be buying these apartments there. There's no displacement. That was an old matches industry that went down with now they have Chinese matches, yes, and so they replace these facilities, industrial facilities, with these buildings. This was part of a project, comparative study between Mexico City and Santiago. We interviewed the woman that was like the person in charge of this project and selling the apartments. And she told us that 40% of the buyers of those apartments were young people that were born and raised in these working class settlements. And we put a name to that. And we found the same in Chile, in Santiago. And we call that endemic gentrifiers, endemic gentrification, gentrifiers that are of the area. So this is completely another picture, as gentrification. This type of gentrification is far away from the image of gentrifiers of the upper classes that will colonize and displace people from low-income neighborhoods. They bought there, they buy there because they will stay in their neighborhood. They have their friends, their parents. Now, this is a minority of people, the ones that are in social mobility process from these working class people. They're a minority. And of those, only a minority will buy apartments there. Others that are in upper social mobility will go elsewhere. And I think that here is a very important thing in theoretical terms. Cities are built, are transformed by minorities. When you go to the sociological or economic analysis, attention is put in majorities, not minorities. I would call that immense minorities. Gentrifiers are minorities of minorities. Minorities of the middle classes that are willing to move and live with people poorer than them. But they can make a big effect of transforming parts of the cities. And that's demands on us, from us, to be more spatial in our analysis. That was the third. Fourth, real estate capitalism is deploying a new strategy to overcome the current financial crisis and housing bubbles. Bauman, the sociologist, said once that economy in the past had crises and normal periods of economic growth that were interrupted by crisis. And he said, now capitalism is about crisis. No, crises are the normality. And what we are living, did the 2008 crisis ended? It seems we are in permanent crisis, no, in economic terms. So real estate capital is looking to the rental housing markets. The Economist magazine headlined its cover story, that's a picture there. Home ownership is the West's biggest economic policy mistake. It is an obsession that undermines growth, fairness, and public faith in capitalism. That's amazing. That's amazing. A further article highlights that investing in rental housing is an unprecedented opportunity and that the current decrease in housing affordability helps. So the housing shortage, the lack of affordability of housing turns into a good thing. It helps business, that is, I would say, yes? People's capitalism, Margaret Thatcher, and the celebration of Thatcher's million homes, as well as Pinochet's owners but not proletarians slogan. He took it from Franco government in Spain, will remain as remoras from the past, and there will be no shortage of those who extol this new turn of real estate capital as a manifestation of creative destruction. Creative destruction, we think of Schumpeter, but a concept that has an undeniable family resonance with what Marx and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto. Constant revolutionizing of production and interrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profane. Creative distraction on the land amounts to spatial ruptures, because real estate capitalism is looking for land rents. My fifth idea, public policies to face the urban growth machine, in addition to prioritizing the control of land rent with the support of a mobilized civil society, require pragmatic knowledge on the social configuration of space. Charles Tilly, social scientists' explanation usually presuppose the existence of certain self-propelled essences or ontological realities of an individual or collective type, like, for instance, Homo economicus for neoliberals or global capitalism for structuralists. There's a big distance between these totalizing theories and empirical facts. Robert Merton, a well-known sociologist from the US, recommended middle range theory as one that is not concerned with the historical generalization that the degree of social order or conflict prevails in society, but with the analytical problem of identifying the social mechanisms which produce a greater degree of order or less conflict that would obtain if these mechanisms were not called into play. The quest for theories of the middle range exacts a distinctly different commitment from the sociologists than does the quest for an all-embracing unified theory. This is a type of projects, social housing projects in Chile that seeks to mix people from middle classes and very low, people coming from camps, from shantytowns. And these projects are doing well. There are so few projects because of land. Land has better uses, economic uses, than social housing. So that's a problem. The problem is in land. And that's Valparaíso, the principal port of Chile, where we have gentrification with displacement. So I'm not saying that gentrification does not displace people, but we need to find opportunities. And what is happening for the most in the peripheries of the Latin American city, when you have these gated communities for middle-income people, then buyers of those homes are these endemic gentrifiers, but also people from upper classes that are going there. So that's an opportunity, and that needs from us more research and better concepts, like these middle range concepts, in order to understand better and to intervene and act with more success. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Professor Şevkiye Şence Türk. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Şevkiye Şence Türk. I'm working at the Istanbul Technical University in Istanbul. Before presenting my presentation, I would like to thank you for your kind invitation, but I could not do Beirut due to health problems. I apologize for this. Thank you very much. I share my presentation. My presentation subject questioning public value capture in inner city renewal current practice in Istanbul. First of all, I'll give shortly public value capture. As you know, rapid urbanization, increased need for urban infrastructure, have, however, budget constraint put an increased pressure on the city governments. In response to this, land value capture has gained importance. The concept of public value capture is based on the acceptance that increased land values due to plan decision and public infrastructure that increase without landowners' effort cannot belong to landowners, that large part of these increase and whole of this increase should go public. According to Professor Alterman, Professor Smolko, value capture instruments are divided three sections. First is macro value capture instruments, second direct instruments, and third one indirect instrument. As you know, urban renewal projects involve demolition and reconstruction, blight, decaying, or unused urban areas. In these projects, to render urban renewal are more appealing to investor, new usage planning decision and new development rights are given, and public infrastructure areas are developed. As a result of this, real estate values in urban renewal area increase. From the public land value capture in urban renewals areas, reduction of unjust gains, increasing public share, and cost recovery can be provided. With public land value capture, self-financing can be provided in urban renewal practice. But however, it's not easy to ensure capture public value. Why? Because incentives are frequently used in urban renewal areas to attract investor, but high-level capture amount can prevent this investment. Therefore, in urban renewal areas, there are three critical issues. First, the determination of capacity to capture value. Second, method of value capture. Third one, the distribution of value among actors. In this presentation, I'll give Fikirtepe urban renewal case, focus this critical issue. As you see in the figure in Istanbul, you see risky areas, reserve areas, disaster-based urban renewal areas. As you see in Istanbul, very dynamic structure in sense of urban renewal areas. In Turkey, there are different land value capture instruments, macro instruments, direct instruments, indirect instruments. Here, plan notes are important. Why? Generally, in urban renewals areas, we use plan notes. The other instruments are not used in urban renewal project. Plan notes are prepared based on local spatial plans. In terms of legal process, plan notes give information in detail, and they give some clarification related to unexplained issues on the plan. Over time, their scope has changed. In current use, plan notes define variation such as mix and optional land use function, or development with preliminary project. Also, they give some rules related to urban infrastructure and land contribution. Fikirtepe urban renewal area. Fikirtepe urban renewal area is located within the Kadıköy district in the Anatolian side. These settlements emerge one of the squatter settlements in Anatolian side. Fikirtepe urban renewal area was announced by the ministry risky area in 2013. This area is 131 hectares. In this study, 10% of the whole study we examined. Here, methodology quite important. Why? Because there is no published and reliable data for the whole process in the Fikirtepe urban renewal area. Why? It's too difficult to calculate public value capture. Therefore, in this study, public value capture capacity in urban renewal project is analyzed using some assumptions by taking into consideration interviews with different actors and legal and institutional framework. Also, we take into consideration some basis. In these studies, calculations were made with the cost method. Also, in this study, not only a construction cost is calculated, but also the role and impact of the actor in the process is revealed. I'll give a process shortly. First of all, ministry made a plan on the area. Developer and landowners made agreements. After this agreement, the area was demolished and evacuated. After this, land parcels were assembled. A big parcel was constituted on the area. Some part of these parcels were ceded to public, and only big parcels, high-rise buildings were constructed. As you see, this urban renewal focus on the physical renewal, not include social renewal, I think. There are different actors in the process: Ministry of Environment and Urbanization, Ministry of Finance, Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, Kadıköy Municipality, constructor companies, property owners. In this study, the actors who affected by the cost or income in cash, in kind, were evaluated in the process. At this point, the other actors like non-governmental organization and association are not included in the analysis. You see before and after urban renewal. We compare spatial and construction characteristics. We can say increasing population, changing population, increasing construction, reduced amount of social and technical infrastructure, and changing road area. You see a process stage. There are different stages: identification, preparing plan, agreement, demolition, land and contribution, design, construction, and sales. Here, public land value capture based on plan nodes. There are two plan nodes. First is related to land contribution. Second is related infrastructure participation fee. And result, the property owner is highest earner with 75% share in the process. The constructor company ranks second with a share 13%, and public sector ranks third with a share of 13%. At the beginning, we assumed that constructor company is highest earner, but in the process we found that property owner the highest earner with 75%. This is very interesting finding for us. The other important findings in this study is 1.8% of the total value of the urban renewal was captured by the public. This is very low. After result, we make some implication and suggestion. You can see in the Fikirtepe example, infrastructure participation fee and then contribution for social and technical infrastructure provided by using plan notes, but this plan note is insufficient to provide value capture. Therefore, we propose at the beginning of the project land contribution from the property owner for social and technical infrastructure should be on legal grounds. In the process, plan notes are used, but plan notes are not strong legal instruments. Therefore, the process should be on legal grounds. The constructor undertaking the construction of new buildings should also contribute new infrastructure. This contribution should be on legal grounds. On the project complete, property owners should be taxes. Taxes quite important. We propose betterment tax. This tax they play a practical role in supporting efficient and legitimate planning and urban management system. You see our proposal. You see some stage, the important stage for public value capture, agreement stage. In this agreement stage, we propose planning agreements, but these planning agreements based on not private law. Planning agreements should be based on public law. Landowner should give a land contribution for social and technical infrastructure by plan notes. Developer should give infrastructure participation fee by planning agreement. At the end of the process, sales are important. In this process, betterment tax, we propose betterment tax. Property owner should give betterment tax. The amount goes to a fund. This fund should be used for construction, social and technical infrastructure, for rent assistance, for urban renewal application in areas where there is no increase in value. With this fund, sustainability can be provided, and the existence of the such a tax could ensure that urban renewal can be applied when necessary and in right way, instead of functioning as a means of enrichment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Türk. Now I invite Mariona Segú. Please take the floor.
All right, so I want to start by thanking Mona, Abir, and Antonia for the invitation and the organization. So as Mona said, my presentation is going to be a bit different. So it's more applied work. So as I was saying, my work is a bit more applied. So I'm going to be talking about an evaluation of a tool that is the vacancy tax. So I don't know, is this a land value capture tool, a housing value capture tool? I don't know about that. I let urban planners think about that. I will just tell you if it works, okay? All right, so vacancy is shockingly a surprising phenomenon in the European area, maybe apparently after my visit here also in Beirut. But so in Europe, it represents 10% of the housing stock, which is quite high and quite shocking given the circumstances. Okay? Why should we care about this? Because so in a situation where housing affordability is increasing and we have issues housing people, this is looked at as an issue, right? Why do we have vacant houses if there's so many people that cannot find a house? There's a mismatch there. So since access to housing has worsened in recent years, public practitioners have tried to look at ways of improving this housing affordability, and one of these ways might be trying to reduce vacancy in order to house these unhoused people, right? So in this paper, I'm going to look at the impact of one of these interventions that tries to tackle high vacancy, which is a vacancy tax. Basically, the question that I want to ask is a vacancy tax useful to decrease vacancy levels in dense areas? Okay, so let's first start by trying to understand why vacancy exists, right? Because otherwise we cannot tackle it well. So it can seem puzzling to have high vacancy tax in dense cities, in highly populated cities, because so they are characterized by a high housing demand. So this housing demand should fill these vacant units, right? So why is this not happening? This is also shocking in a context where supply of housing is inelastic. So this is less the case of the US, but in European cities, housing supply is very inelastic. Inelastic means that it takes a long time to react to shocks. Okay, so land is very scarce, everything is already built, so it's hard to build more, it's hard to suddenly increase the housing stock. This is hard to do. So then, why is there a vacancy if all these factors should tell us that vacancy should be very low, right? So in economics, we argue that there are two reasons why vacancies might exist. The first one is market frictions. This is something that economists love a lot, to talk about market frictions. Okay, so basically you have landowners and tenants that offer different goods, tenants that look for different kinds of housing, and this generates some searching friction. So you need to spend some time looking for the unit you want, some transaction costs, some uncertainty on the future. So all this might just create some natural vacancy during the process of this matching creates a matching between a tenant and a landowner. But I argue here that there is a second kind of vacancy that I will call voluntary vacancy. Okay? This is landowners voluntarily keeping their unit empty for a given reason. So either in the case of France, this can be due to the regulation of the tenants market, of the rental market. Okay, so landowners can think, well, it's very hard to evict a tenant once if suddenly they stop paying, because they are very well protected in France. So this is just a mess. So I prefer not to do anything, so that if I want to use my unit, I will be able to use it. Okay, that can be one reason that what's one landowners think. Another possibility is what we call the option problem, which is just the fact that there's uncertainty about the future with respect to the house prices or rent prices, so that this will lead landowners to maybe wait a bit to see what the price really is before renting the unit. So if I expect that the rent price is going to increase, I don't want to sign a contract right now. I want to sign it 6 months from now so that I can have a higher rent, right? So there may be some of this going on, or simply in the sales prices. Maybe I just buy a house to sell it in a 5 years time, and I don't care about renting it, so I'm just waiting. It's just an investment asset, so maybe this is more the reason of what explains vacancy in Beirut, if I'm not wrong. So all this will create what we call voluntary vacancy. Okay. Why should policymakers aim at reducing vacancy? First of all, it is an easy, fast, and cheap way to increase the available stock of units. Okay, so if you want to house more people, one option you have is to increase the housing supply, which is costly, it takes time, and it's complicated. Or you can say, we already have some houses that are empty. Let's just use them. Okay, so that's why taxing vacancy can be an easy and fast way to improve housing affordability. But also there are other reasons that are related with the concentrations of vacancy. So concentrations of vacancy have been related to higher rates of crime, decrease in property values of the properties that are around them. So these are all other externalities of having high concentration of vacancies that can also be a reason for us wanting to reduce vacancy. So what have other countries done to try to tackle vacancy? In the Netherlands, they have decriminalized squatting. This means if a house is empty for more than a given period, you can go and occupy it and it's fine. Okay, that's one way. In the US, there's sort of a vacancy registration fee. Don't know much about it. Maybe some of you know more about it. But then the star tool is the vacancy tax. Okay, this is a bit in place in the UK with the in line with the property tax, Israel, France, in my country as well. So I'm going to talk about the case in France. Yet, so some of these countries have used this, but we still don't know whether it is effective or not. I'll try to give an answer to this question in this paper. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to show you a first attempt to evaluate one of these taxes in the context of France. So I'm going to use what's called the taxe sur les logements vacants, tax on vacant apartments in France, which was implemented in 1999, so quite a while ago. I have a theoretical model in order to understand why vacancy is created. Don't worry too much, I will go fast on this. I will just show you so no math for today. I will just show you the predictions of the model. And then I will show you the empirical analysis that I do, the data that I use, and the results. So as a spoiler, I can tell you that yes, so we do find, I do find an effect of the vacancy tax, and I find that it is an effective tool in decreasing vacancy. Okay, I will try to convince you that this is a robust result. You tell me if I manage. Okay, so just very briefly on the model, I just want to clarify this idea of having two sources of vacancy. Okay, let's get so this capital V is total vacancy in a given market, and this is composed with two elements, a small v and I. Small v is just the open vacancies. It's just like the units that are, if you want, on the market. They are being offered on the market. So they are vacant for a while they're waiting for a tenant. but it's gonna be fast, okay? It's gonna be only a very short term of open vacancy, but there is always going to be some units in this category, okay? And then there are these other kind of vacancies that I call the inactive stock or the voluntary vacancy, which are units that are not looking for a tenant, okay? That are just sitting there and not being used, okay? As I said, those exist due to these different reasons that can explain the existence of those, okay? The first one is this price uncertainty that I was talking about. People are just waiting to see whether prices increase before offering them on the market. Or it can also be that vacancy is an opportunity to improve the quality of the unit. So I'll try to, do some renovation so that I can charge a higher rent. Or it can just be a strategic withholding of units. So I'm just like gonna wait a bit in order to sell it in the future. So that can, all of those can explain this inactive vacancy. So what should happen? So this is this is the entire housing market. Okay, some of the units are occupied by tenants. Some are vacant but on the market, so those will not last long here. Will be moving from occupied to on the market, and there are some units that are just inactive, sitting there. Okay. What my model predicts, so after all the math that I'm not showing you, what I find is that what should be happening is that the total length of vacancy is now shorter. So this distance is now shorter than this distance before. And so what happened with these units? Some became occupied, okay? So now the occupied part is larger, and some more became on the market. And the part that goes down is the inactive stock, okay? So the tax on vacancy should decrease this kind of vacancy and increase this one, okay? So we should incentivize people to put more units on the market, increase the blue part, and decrease the inactive part. Okay? So that's what my mathematical models say with all these assumptions. Let's see if this is true in the numbers. Okay. So let me tell you a bit more about the tax in France. So this is a tax that was implemented in 1999. The aim of the tax was to precisely this, try to reintroduce some units into the market. And it was applied to units that were vacant meaning empty of furniture, not being used for at least 2 years. Okay, so it's quite a, this is definitely not being used for at least 2 years. And it was, so the tax rate that was applied was 10% of a rental value. You could think of the rental value, it's like an estimation of how much you could earn if you would rent your unit for a year. And then you take 10% of these, and this is how much you pay in taxes. But interestingly, this rate increases with the year, with how long has the unit been vacant. Okay, so the first 2 years you pay 10%, but then you pay 12%, and then 15%, and then it stays at 15%. And interestingly, for my analysis, so this tax was not applied all over in France. Okay, it was only applied to some municipalities. And the conditions for a municipality to be taxed was to belong to a urban unit of more than 200,000 inhabitants and to have a substantial disequilibrium between supply and demand, whatever it means. Okay? But in the end, what it happened is what some municipalities were taxed and some not. Just notice that this is only in very dense urban areas. Okay? So it's only in urban areas with more than 200,000 inhabitants, so it's about cities. It's not about rural vacancy. It's about urban vacancy. Okay, so just to finalize the institutional setting, France loves taxes. So we not only have one tax, we have 2 more taxes on housing. Let's first start with the property tax, very standard. So we have property tax paid by any landowner, but there's also this other additional tax, very original and special for France, which is called the residence tax. This is a tax that you pay when you live in an apartment. So either you are a tenant and you pay this tax, you are an owner-occupier and you pay the tax on your primary residence, or you have a secondary residence, you occupy this unit only some periods of the year, but you still occupy it, so you still pay this tax, okay? This is a municipal tax rates vary by the municipal level, okay? But so, what is important here to remember is that all housing units pay this tax, occupied units pay this one, and vacant units pay the previous tax, okay? So they all pay two taxes, so you can choose. Why? Do you want to pay the taxe d'habitation or you want to pay the vacancy tax? But you will all pay two taxes if you are in one of the taxed cities, okay? All right, let me tell you briefly about the data. So the data we'll use to analyze this question is precisely tax data from this taxe d'habitation, from this residence tax, okay? So I have all the units in France that pay this tax. This is like a huge data set with several millions of units, with every unit that pays this tax, this residence tax. So the good thing of this is that it's very easy for me to measure vacancy then, because it's like either you are in this data set and you are occupied, or you don't, then you're vacant, okay? So the advantage of all these taxes that we have in France is that it's very useful for statistics. So we can measure vacancy very easily, okay? This is very rare, and this is not the case of any other countries, not even other European countries. We struggle a lot to measure vacancy. Okay? So well, I'm gonna use this data set.
Marion, please, we're running out of time.
Yes. Let me just show you a map. So this is the areas that were taxed and the areas that were not. So blue areas were municipalities, so urban units composed of several municipalities, all of them taxed. Control are the ones that are not taxed, okay? Are the ones that I will use to compare. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a comparison between blue areas and orange areas. And I want to see what happens with the vacancy rate between the two groups of cities, so that I can tell whether the tax was effective or not in reducing vacancy. Okay, so let me just, that's the equation I use. I'm gonna go fast, just to tell you that, I will use as a control group, as a comparison group, municipalities that also hold the condition of being more than 200,000 inhabitants, but were not taxed. Okay, so that's the most important slide that I want to show you. So this is the graph. This is the evolution of vacancy tax. The blue line is what happened in taxed municipalities. The yellow line is what happened in non-taxed, but very similar municipalities. Okay, the tax was implemented here in 1999, and I will compare the two green points, before and after. Okay, so before, no municipality have the tax. After, only the blue have the tax, okay? So what we can see very clearly here is that the vacancy rate in the yellow group stayed very constant, while in the tax group, it went down, okay? So what I'm gonna measure is, what is this difference, okay? So before the blue was above, after the blue is below. So I'm gonna measure the difference between the two, and this is going to be my effect. Okay, that's basically what all my econometrics models do. I'm gonna skip this and too many math. Let me just show you the results. Okay, so this is the computing of the difference between the two lines. Okay, this number are the important ones. So this is 8 percentage points. So this tells us the effect. Okay, so this tells us what is the difference. Okay, so this means that the tax was able to reduce vacancy by 8 percentage points, which, if you refer to the initial level of vacancy, which was around 7%, this implies a 13% decrease in vacancy. Okay, so basically that's the important part. And I'm going to skip these two, and I'm just going to show you, so what happened, okay? So if vacancy decreased, what were the units, where did the units become? Okay, so I'll try to see it. So basically, this is the important part. So either they become primary residences or secondary residences. Okay, and I see that most of this decrease, the -8, is almost exactly this +7. Okay, so this means that the entire reduction in vacancy was translated into an increase in primary residences. So people shifted their vacant units into primary residences. How? If you look at this shows that there was an increase in the share of renters. So this suggests that it was through putting them into the rental market. Okay, so now all these they were vacant. Now they're put into the market. They were rented, and they become primary residences for these tenants. So that's it. That's the conclusion. The point, if you keep one thing from this presentation, it's that yes, vacancy tax is a good tool to reduce vacancy and to reactivate some of the inactive units. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Mariona. Well, we're running out of time, but we have to discuss a little bit, I think. So please, if you can come, Mariona, if you can.
Yes.
It was a very interesting and very challenging presentation. I have two questions. It seems in your presentation that there are two contradictory phenomena. On one side, you say that neoliberal policies produced a breakdown of traditional patterns of segmentation with the spatial dispersion of wealthy people in the urban territory, but these policies didn't unify or homogenize the social map of the city. And on the contrary, they favored the appearance and deepened of urban ghetto. And on the other side, you say that the gentrification of low-income urban peripheries is not generating displacement and even contribute to weakening segregation. So, can you explain a little more about this apparent contradiction in the phenomena? My second question is about the housing grant versus home ownership. You say that the new global crusade of real estate capital against home ownership has become a key social struggle. And in contrast, you seem to praise the culture of home ownership as an element of the fight for an inclusive city. I should say that this is a very provocative stance, since transforming the society into a society of homeowners who will naturally move towards adopting conservative values has always been the motto of right-wing politicians. In Lebanon, for example, where public housing policy has always been missing, the unique measure that was taken by the Public Housing Corporation was to subsidize home ownership for middle-class households, while there is a huge gap in social rental housing for young generations and for lower income classes that cannot get access to the property. So could you explain how the fight for home ownership can become an element of the fight for the right of the city, to the city for all? These are my two questions.
Okay, I will start with thank you for the good questions. I will start with the second one. Home ownership is kind of a dream in the struggle for housing, social movements. We have these unstable economies with a lot of poverty, unemployment. So owning a house is a base of security, is what you can give to your children. And that's simple a fact for us. Every social movement around housing of low-income people in Latin America will aim at home ownership. And I'm not sure that makes necessary. Well, there's an element of conservative culture in that, but what is the alternative? Now we have been, for instance, I know about Chile, that the traditional percentage of people owning the houses where they live is higher in lower income households than in, it's very high for the sum, for the total, but it's higher among poor people. And that's an historical outcome of the struggle for housing. And so what's happening now with the gentrification of those traditional segregated, homogeneous part of the city, that the real estate promoters are building gated communities, but people, because they are owners of the houses, are not easily displaced. So that for that second question. The first one is, yes, it's true. It's kind of a contradictory, but the evolution of the city since the economic reform was enacted, liberalism. So on the one side, in Chile we had this housing policy that was very effective in quantitative terms, producing units, and units were produced segregated in those parts of the city. At the same time, in the other parts of the market, in the upper income parts of the housing market, started appearing some projects that were not located in this upper income cone. They started moving, but that was very few cases, and it has been increasing. So the evolution of our cities has these two contradictory trends. So there we have many parts of the city that still remain homogeneous, segregated, with no gated communities. But this is a trend that you can see everywhere in Latin America, that real estate, for real estate investors, those low levels of prices of land in this segregated periphery, they buy that land at that price, they build the gated communities and will sell back the land, but a much more higher price. That's what they are seeking. So I think it's contradictory, but it's really contradictory trends of the evolution. So the mixing of these trends in specific spaces makes, in part, the peculiarities of the city in its way. And I believe very much that we have to understand how have better knowledge of these trends in specific parts of the city in order to see what we can do in order to build, inclusionary housing and better cities.
It's very interesting for us planners. I mean, instead of having a segregation which is geographical, you have segregation on the same place of different. This is very interesting, yeah. Well, Mariona, and then I will go to Dr. Türk. Mariona, it's also a very interesting presentation of the French case. where we can measure directly the effect of taxes on housing vacancy. However, I would be interested to look a little bit more into the factors that produce housing vacancy. You said that, well, you started with the market frictions. It's the most obvious factor, the inadequacy between the offer and the demand. Typically, for example, the size of apartments that do not correspond to social needs. For example, in Beirut, large apartments that nobody can afford to pay for. It would be naive to think that the invisible hand of the market can automatically correct such distortion, since there are other ideological and cultural factors that play a key role, like, for example, the strong attachment to social images of high standing, etc. So, well, another example of market distortion is inadequate location of housing units, too far from employment or in attractive areas, etc., etc. My question is that in these cases, taxing vacancy may have a limited effect, since even if the landowners accept to reduce the rent or the selling prices, they may not find people willing to pay for a product that does not correspond to their needs. On the other hand, the other case is that of speculative urban land market, in which buying an apartment serves as a substitute for depositing money in a bank or investing in a productive economic sector, hoping to get a higher profit in the future, what you call voluntary vacancy. This has been the case in Lebanon, and more particularly in the capital Beirut before 2019 crisis, where the prices of apartments were artificially boosted by unrealistic expectation of speculators. This has also been the case after 2019 crisis, where people rushed to buy apartments in order to get their money out of the banks. In such cases, it is more likely that taxes could help effectively in reducing housing vacancy. My question is that in your detailed study, did you look at the different cases that produce vacancy and the effect of taxes depending on these different scenarios?
Okay. Well, I think I have this one still working. No? Yeah. So for the first question on the inadequate location, that's absolutely right. So that's why this tax was only implemented in areas, very densely populated areas, where the housing demand is very high. Okay, so that's why what I wanted to say at the beginning is that this is a way to deal with vacancy in very dense urban areas, not a way to deal with vacancy in rural isolated areas where there's a different issue. As you say, in these places, people don't, so houses are empty because they don't manage to find a tenant. In these cases, a vacancy tax is not the solution. It's only the solution in densely populated areas. As for the second aspect, so unfortunately in my study, theoretically, in my theoretical model, I identify these two types of vacancy, but in practice and the data, I cannot measure the two different types. I have only one measure of vacancy, and I don't know how many of them are open vacancies or how many of them are inactive vacancies. So that's why I build the theoretical model, because it's the only way to fully understand this. But empirically, it was not possible to measure the two different. Yeah.
Dr. Türk, I was really very interested in this in your presentation about public value capture in urban renewal projects. It's clear that the increase in property values is maximized in urban renewal projects, since the delta between the prior value of land in derelict or underused urban areas, and the value of new attractive environments is usually very high. However, I have a question regarding the mechanisms of value capture in urban renewal areas, which can sometimes be very tricky. You spoke a little bit about it. For example, in such urban renewal areas, you have usually a multiplicity of right holders, landowners, tenants, inhabitants, retailers, shopkeepers, etc., etc. Very often, property rights are also distributed in a multiplicity of shareholders due to historic reasons. How could the excess value between these be distributed between these various actors? In the case, for example, of the reconstruction of Beirut Central District, you gave an example in Turkey. We have a very interesting example in Beirut. It's the reconstruction of the Beirut Central Districts in the 90s. In that case, a private company was created, grouping the various right holders on one side and investors who would bring capital to the company on the other side. This private company was in charge of financing, executing, and managing all infrastructures and public spaces, and returned them to the state after a period of time. And it was also in charge of selling properties to the developers. The Lebanese state reimbursed the company for the cost of infrastructure and public spaces expenditure by giving it the right to reclaim the sea public domain. But value capture didn't profit to the public, but to the private company shareholders alone. So this is a place where you see that in that case, the public didn't get anything. Another case is that of urban renewal projects executed on public or municipal land. In this case, we cannot speak literally of land value capture, since the land is not the property of landowners that saw their land value increase without their effort. The public entities, central or local governments, will realize profit by selling properties to developers, but this profit is not the result of classic land value capture from landowners or right holders that pay for the rise of the value of their property due to public investment. It's a different type of value capture. So can you give a little bit some hints about the complexity of the situations in that cases? I think it's very interesting. The issue of urban renewal is very interesting. It is very tricky sometimes.
Thank you very much for your question. As you see in Turkey, urban renewal aim is problematic because I showed in my presentation some urban renewal location, but this location is problematic for Istanbul because of earthquake. Urban renewal areas quite important priorities. Urban renewal areas based on earthquake is more important than the others. But in the practice, the investor and the landowners focus on different areas. The different areas is high value areas. There is a different idea related to urban renewal practice. The main aim is enrichment, especially in urban areas. Landowners and developers have important gains in this practice. First of all, at the beginning, we suppose that we suppose that developer receive the highest gain, but according to result, developer don't receive gain than expected. Why? Because the gains goes to landowners, not public, not developer. The important gains goes to the landowner. This is a problematic issue, especially public value capture is very low in this example, and when compare the other example in Istanbul, the other renewal example, the same results. The gains goes to not developer or not public, gains to the landowner. Renter is not considered within this scheme. Landowners quite important and receive highest gain according to this policy. Different countries, different policies can be used, but in Turkey, the Turkish government gives the gains to leave to investor in the policy, but in the reality, the landowners receive the highest gains in the urban renewal project. This is a problematic issue. The public share quite low. The main problem here using instruments. When we look at this example, the main tools is plan notes, but plan notes are quite problematic instruments. Why? Because their legal structure, legal power is problematic. In Turkey, generally, taxes are regulated general law in Turkey. But when we look at in this example, plan notes are used. Why? Because indirect instruments, these are less institutional. This instrument is flexible from the government, but end of the result of this urban renewal in sense of public value capture, these gains don't go to public. However, normally gains have to go public. In this policy, in my opinion, this policy is wrong in Turkey, in urban renewal areas. As you know, earthquake is a very problematic issue for Turkey, especially in Istanbul. If we use effective public land value capture instruments, we can prevent the effect of the earthquake risk. In my opinion, the policy, especially in sense of public value capture policy, is wrong in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll open now the debate. I know. How many questions? No. 3. Okay. We start from behind and then we...
Interest of time. Thank you for your presentations. A quick question for Mariona. I was just wondering, after implementing the tax on vacancy and the reduction, whether you know what the characteristics of the apartments that remained inactive are. Are they high-end? Are they necessarily larger apartments? are they located in specific geographic neighborhoods or not, and whether that could help us think a kind of other tools to use in order to address the issue. Thank you.
Hi, my question is a follow-up to Mariona as well. I was wondering if you found out any correlation between the application of the tax and if that affected rent cost at all. Thank you.
Hello, I have also a follow-up on these two questions regarding the limitations and the efficiency of the tax, in particular in relation to law enforcement. And I'm thinking of Lebanon, where we have a history of running away from the law. Maybe this comes from how we define a vacant apartment. So you said that in the French law, a vacant apartment is a flat that is empty of furniture for 2 years. I'm thinking of Lebanon. If we are to apply this tax, will it be efficient if, for example, an expat owns a flat and he's not here all year long, but he can come, for example, for a few weeks, twice per year, and he furnishes the apartment? Will it make it a vacant apartment? And so is it efficient, or we need to find other ways of maybe reducing vacancy?
I will give only one question, but to Francisco. If somebody has a question to Francisco? Yes, Enrique.
One, and I know I had the chance, I've always had the chance of asking him elsewhere, but if you can explain too, because I wonder to what extent the fact that at least in the Chilean context, I don't know if this would matter or not for the Lebanese context, but it would in the US, that the home ownership there, though, doesn't carry, because of the way that especially for the lower incomes, the way they were structured, the households don't carry debt or mortgages or of a significant scale. And to what extent that matters for the stability of the homes, because I think in the United States, you can have a home ownership, but with a very high debt burden that is constantly making the kind of that home ownership somewhat unstable. We saw that in 2008 in the crisis. I wonder to what extent that's something to consider for other contexts. And then the other one was if we're observing at the scale that you're asking us to observe, what are the policy implications? Is it a city level policy implication? Are we looking at a district policy? What's the scale of what's the scale of the land policy thing that we should pay attention to be consistent with the analysis and the territoriality that you're talking about?
Shall I start? Okay. Yes, thanks for all these interesting questions. I'm happy to discuss more later. So first question, super interesting question. And actually, no, I couldn't look at this because I work at the municipal level, so I aggregate everything at the municipal. So I just know the number of vacant units, or I couldn't look at which types. I only looked at average surface of apartments, and it didn't change that much. But definitely some more work to do there to see exactly which units.
We can georeference them and know where they are.
Yeah. So that definitely super interesting way forward for research about rents. So this is 1999. So it's hard to have data of rents right now. In 1999, it was even harder. So no data on rents. But data, I have data on house sales, and I have looked at this. So the economic theory would predict that if there is a sudden increase in the supply, we should see a decrease. But then if owners anticipate that there's this tax, they may be less interested in constructing, so they would be a reduction in stock in the long term. So that it would reduce supply in the long term and hence increase prices. So the predictions would be decrease in prices at the short term and then sudden increase. I don't find this. I find prices are very stable. Okay, probably because the shock was not big enough. Okay, to have a macroeconomic effect on prices, and about enforcement living on. Okay, so what you're talking about is probably tax on secondary residences, which is also something that France is discussing about doing this as well, and adding yet another tax. So this could be a solution. But so as I said, the crucial aspect that you need to put some of these taxes is measurement. So you need to know how many vacant units there are, how many secondary units, and this is, so the French tax system is useful to measure this. So that's why we are using the tax system to add even more taxes, but we need it in order to measure it. Otherwise, so yeah. So I discussed with some of you on ways to measure vacancy, but basically, first step is find a systematic way to measure vacancy in a dynamic way, so yearly, and then you can think of what should we tax them or not and how.
Thank you, Francisco.
Enrique, the first question about owners that have big debts. In the case of Chile, that's not important debts, because you have in the low-income people that got a voucher and a home, the voucher tended to cover all the cost of the house. For the more people, 100%. And so people that are like low income, middle, that get the voucher, they have some debt, but it's not really important. And that's the tradition of housing policies in Chile. The poorer you are, the cheaper the house for you, and they tend to cover everything. Now, what happens in the middle classes now, I don't know. There are some trouble, of course, but people that bought houses with those low interest rates, but they can have another type of problem, unemployment. But I don't know about that. About the scale of land policies, the first picture I started with, this social housing compound in Concepcion, I think that the answer to the problems this compound had was scale, because this is an urban renewal program of 70 hectares, more or less. It's really big, and people that were living in shantytowns in the area, they had the opportunity to stay there in new houses, and those are these compounds, but they're kind of micro-segregated in this huge area. And there are other factors, for instance, the line of the train that was to be, how do you say that? Put it underground, and they didn't They did that because too much money. So there are like some spatial-specific problems, and the question of scale could be the answer. So you have to be, how do you work with segregation? How do you define segregation? We have, for instance, in Latin America, highly segregated cities, because the rich people tended to live in one part of the city, this cone. But if you see the composition, the social composition of these areas where the rich concentrated, they are diverse. And that makes a peculiarity to Latin American cities. And so you have to be shifting scale, and you have to select the scale of your analysis or of your intervention, depending on what do you want, and try to trying to understand the phenomena, especially of segregation.
Okay, thank you. Mona, what do? We take quarter of an hour or
we thank
break?
Dr. Turk also for being with us despite
Yes.
her personal difficult circumstances.
Thank you.
Really, thank you for great insights on Turkey. Thank you, everyone, for a fantastic conversation. We're going to eat out of your lunch break time, so please shorten it as much as possible. And we have a couple of colleagues who have to leave to the airport after the next session. So I'm going to ask you to grab your coffees or teas and come back in, and let's really start very sharp at 12. Thank you so much.